Well, Eric, kicking things off here this week, I think the big news of just these last few days and kind of getting in here this week is, of course, just this big warm up in temperatures, kind of a 180 flip from what we saw, from the back half of January getting into February, kind of bringing in some better chances of precipitation for some areas that are really needing it. So just kind of give us an overview of what to expect through this shift as we move through the first half of February.
Yeah, so for most of us, we have really just felt kind of the sting of very cold air. If you're east of that line, we've had a lot of mild air try to get into the plains this winter, but the new push and the surge of warmth that's coming is going to go all the way through the Ohio River Valley. So the map I've been drawing on, this is the mid-January to the beginning of February temperature ranks, and all this colder air in the east has really driven up a lot of heating demand. Just something to think about there. But the big question is going to be as we kind of go forward, what does that temperature pattern look like, and how do things change as a result on the precipitation, like you asked? So let's get into it, okay? First of all, interesting thing to think about with temperatures. Right now, the Great Lakes are about, well, we'll call it 55% covered ice, 54, 55%. And what I'm interested in seeing here is that normally when we have high ice concentration, which this is, average would be about 36% would be normal for this time of year. But when we have that much excess ice, it tends to impact the downwind sides of the Great Lakes going into March, April, and maybe even a little bit into May. What I mean is like Michigan or this very productive part of Ontario getting into Pennsylvania or New York could possibly have a cooler spring. But what's really interesting is look at how almost all of Lake Erie is covered in ice. Well, yesterday there was a really cool video of what happened on Lake Erie. Watch this here with me. This was on Sunday. Look at this crack open up here on the ice. That's a huge, I mean, I just try to think about the magnitude of this, Dawson. Like this is a great lake, and that crack just extends, this whole way. And I always kind of wonder, like, well, who did what where? Like, did someone throw a, like a firework in here, just blow? But anyways, it's all driven by wind, but just incredible to see that going across there. Now, since we're talking about the cold side of things first, I do want to point out we are expecting, with the warm up you mentioned, for all of the snow here to be melting very soon. My biggest concern is this whole Missouri and Central Plains basin that has no snow on it at all right now. That's got to switch around because this is one of our major river systems right here, the Missouri, that has got nothing melting into it right at this second. So when you combine that with the lower snowfall amounts that are in the Rockies, especially into the kind of the two basins that feed into the Platte River system, we talked about that last week, they're still very, very short on snow. Now, soil moisture underneath this is still woefully short in a lot of areas throughout the Midwest and the plains and then down south as well. But I think the soil moisture values are going to be corrected where I just drew that kind of zigzag line there because of what's coming in the near term. But there's no denying it. The change is going to have to happen in the West first. Over the last 30 days, big blocking ridges have prevented prevented all moisture, I think, from getting into the West, save maybe this corner of the Pacific Northwest. And over that time period, Florida went drier. Southern Texas went drier. We know we're planting corn down here, but a big portion of the Midwest has been drier as well. If you look back farther, let's go all the way back to October 1st. We measure something called a water year. And a water year is October 1st to September 30th. And if we look over that time frame, just look at this large deficit here in total precipitation. I got some places in the Mid-South over 10 inches behind normal. And so we're waiting to see if this pattern can do something different. And here it is. That is the first time I've been forecasting a trough in the western states since December 21st. That was the first round of western troughs that came in. What I don't like is we're blocked here. There's a high over low, and we're blocked here, high over low. Interestingly enough, as this pattern turns around and goes into this large ridge, there's your warm-up you were talking about, Dawson. But downstream of this is going to set off multiple winter storms throughout Europe right during the time frame we're watching the Winter Olympics. So that could be a very interesting thing to keep an eye on. But the reality of a pattern like this is we start to wake up the West first, and then we're going to wake up this section of the country second. So better precipitation in the West, more snow in the West, and then we start to hit this region, which I just showed you on the soil moisture maps, is very dry. And since October 1 has up to 10-inch deficits, so we need to get this moisture in place. So right now, though, as we get it started, we're still dry and very windy in the plains. There's red flag warnings out for that region, but take a look at this. Here's your newest update from the European model. predicting what the pattern's going to look like. So going forward through Tuesday into Wednesday, you start to see a system roll through the northeast and it leaves a front right here. See that? You can see to the south of it, there's rain. You have to watch this boundary and what's coming up behind it, a big load that's going into California. Because as we go forward, what we're expecting to see here is that this next storm system will likely come out and ride on what's left of that boundary. See how this thing kind of shows up here? Well, it's partly because there was a front kind of left in that area. And as the wave comes out, I mean, this is Saturday getting into Sunday and Monday. And what you notice is look what that snow boundary is. It's a little bit farther to the north as I rock back and forth over next Sunday. Now we got to watch this system carefully because some of the models are producing a huge snowstorm in the northeast. It's not settled, so we have to be very careful with that. But then even following it out here, 1 week from now, we have another storm system. And that one comes through the west and emerges into the central United States. That one's going to be a big snowmaker in the west and possibly a big system in the middle part of the country around February 17th to the 19th. Now, to really see this, we need to go in and look at, well, how much snow, first of all. And then second of all, let's look at total precipitation. So if we load up the snowfall frames here, I'm going to play it relatively quickly, okay? Let's just get all the way out there for a good 15 days. The West needs every inch of this. Even though California is drought free, it needs more snowpack to make sure it gets successfully through the next year. But building up more in the Cascades and Northern Rockies and even some in the Central and Southern Rockies is key. You can see how mild it's going to be here, right? I mean, we're not predicting much snow, but there is better snow coming into parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, North Dakota, the UP of Michigan, which we need as well. So I like that. But what I don't like about this pattern is when I show you total quantitative precipitation. So in other words, how much is the model predicting in total precip? Dawson, I'm just going to do this fast because I want you to see the end result. That's 15 days of moisture. Oh yeah, it's coming through here and here and here in the west. But look at that donut hole. And I've got you right now, according to the European model, grabbing something around a tenth to 2/10 of an inch of total precip. And that's a pretty large vacancy in the middle part of the country, which we know is not good on soil moisture right now. In fact, parts of Nebraska are having one of their driest winters on record. And as we look out there and try to see, as we try to see who's going to be on the wetter side of it, it's here and it's there. It is not in this area. So this is still a bit of a concern as we go forward. Now, will we fix that going out into week 2? So by February 18th, yeah, there's still a western trough. But do these systems kind of come out and fill in the gap? Well, as you look at it, here's all of our week 2 forecasts from our models. You notice that they all kind of have a bubble here of drier conditions, right? That's because they're sending the next system a bit farther to the north like that. So I think there is a chance getting out there into week 2 that we could start to patch that hole that was so dry in the European model, but I'm putting a lot of hope in a week 2 forecast to get us there. Now, back to your big story, the temperatures. I mean, this is crazy. I've got temperatures in Nebraska today possibly touching the upper 70s, 80 in parts of Kansas, and you could hit 64 today. Now, it's just one day. We're going to cool off a little bit tomorrow, but we're still cooling off to where temperatures are 10 to 15 degrees above normal. In fact, in Des Moines all week long, your temperature for the next 7 days will average 19 degrees above normal, Dawson. So I hope you brought shorts and t-shirt to work. It's just very, very warm. This is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We just keep seeing these warm conditions come through. If we just jump day by day, here's today, getting into tomorrow. This is now getting into the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. A lot of mild weather in the middle part of the country. Then we get into the 15th, 16th. Look at this warm up happening the 16th and 17th. That is ahead of that next big storm system I mentioned that could get all the way into the northern plains. Now it will crash. It's still February. So there's going to be some cold air that probably follows that one out there around the 18th, 19th, and 20th. But overall, you blend it together. Your next 5 days look like this. Day 5 through 10 is there. And day 10 through 15 starts to reestablish some colder air. And that's what we're going to have to be on the lookout for here, Dawson. When does the old familiar winter pattern come back in the longer range?
Yeah, and I mean, let's move on to that longer range
Sure.
portion too, because I mean, throughout February, you've been talking about, yeah, these better access to some milder and I guess wetter conditions,
Uh-huh.
flip-flopping from, access to colder air and drier conditions. So we just seen that shift in the forecast. So how are you thinking that this can continue to play out here as we move through the rest of February and maybe getting into that closer time period as we're still thinking about, moisture conditions ahead of the planting season.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still stuck on these analogs, and I got a good question this morning. Some guy that was over in just living off the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, he's like, "Why do you keep hanging on to 2014? It's nothing like it was here in 2014." And I replied, I said, "No, no, no. When we look at these analogs, we're just looking at positional things like ocean temperatures or the polar vortex or the height pattern of the atmosphere, like where the troughs and ridges are, and they're pretty close. There is no such thing as a perfect analog. And so I've picked these three as the best, but they're not. I mean, this isn't a match on 18, 14, or 09. It's just close. But you mentioned the access to cold air. Well, yeah, we think that in February and March, we could still tap into it going into the east. But this mild air may encroach more often on the plains as we saw in January. I mean, that could be the case. Now you look at those years combined, the Delta into the Mississippi Valley, the Ohio Valley was wetter. We would tend to be a little drier back in the plains, while the northern tier of the U.S. tended to be snowy. So have a look at it. Let's go temperatures first. Here's this week. That's next week. Okay. What about week 3? Well, that's week 3 and then into week 4. And what do we see? We kind of see this opening back up, right? But we still see the mild showing up in the models there. So, there's some similarity. What about precipitation? Let's flip it over to a 30-day precipitation map. And I'm going to take it out. I don't know. Let's just go to the 15th. That's plenty. So this is February 15th to March 15th. And look, I mean, is there drier here like we saw? Wetter there and wetter there? Sure, that looks like the analogs. And I'm curious, what does the GFS say? I mean, it's really aggressively wet here, which makes it look more like my analogs. So I don't know. I think that's going to be the case. But Dawson, you say, what about spring? And I'll say, we got to get out there and start looking. This is the new March through May outlook for spring. And you notice that it is wetter in this area, wetter through here. And if there's a drier swath, it's back farther. That's just one model. We have others because the European model is just taking El Nino and pushing it way up here into not just normal El Nino, but by late summer, maybe strong El Nino. Are we getting that over the other models? Well, have a look. That's the new, just released the other day, forecast from what we call the NMME. That's National Multi-Model Ensemble. These are models we run in the US and Canada. They're doing the same thing. By late summer, strong, potentially strong El Nino conditions emerging. And look at what their spring forecast is doing. It's got wetter through here and a little drier farther to the west. But I'm going to tell you, compared to the previous forecast, this is not as dry and this is not as wet. So the model kind of moderated when it looked out there over that time frame. But the big thing, Dawson, that we're going to have to watch is as we transition closer and closer to spring, who has soil moisture correction? Because we've got to have that in spring. And then what do the ocean temperatures look like in the North Pacific once we get fully into June? That will be your indicator onto whether or not we could see, well, problems for the growing season in the US, or if we could see kind of a risk off setup going forward. To be honest with you today, based off of everything I know, I'm going to tell you that, I mean, if you just use the European model, that's May, June, July. That's a risk off setup, man. I mean, what about that tells me to worry about drought? I've got El Nino coming in. I've got good moisture coming in the next few weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, right? The model showed that. And then they're long on the moisture going into May, June, July. What I would say is maybe we have some tight windows coming up for planting, but adequate moisture to start the season based off of what I know today. And it's just February the 9th. This could change dramatically by the time you call me next week.
Yeah, I mean, and we've learned that we can operate a little bit on tight planting windows too, just
Yeah.
based on technology that we've had over the years. And so I guess before we head on down to South America, I want to touch really quickly too on the ocean temperatures that you mentioned, is that we talk a lot about La Nina, El Nino in that transitioning period.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that it's not just those ocean temperatures that we have to watch for, but specifically remembering, looking at the Gulf of Alaska and those ocean temperatures on how those forecasts also impact what we could see here in the midsection of the US.
Yeah, I'll just, this is the reminder of how this works. If it is fall, winter, or spring, we care tremendously about this area. Okay. That's our El Nino La Nina area. Now, this is your dying La Nina, and this is your building of your El Nino. We're making the transition right now. When you get into the heart of summer, this matters way less. than this. And what we're going to keep an eye on is that spot right there. And long story short, if this goes over cold, risk of drought in the central US goes up. If this goes over warm, risk of drought in the central United States goes down, and that risk goes up for the West, right? That seems to be the correlation between those ocean temperature patterns. You're going, what is it right now? And I'm like, well, look at it. It's a little warmer than average, but it doesn't matter yet. This doesn't matter until we get fully into June and July and August as a strong predictor of what's going to happen in the Midwest. Because in June, July, and August, you lose the strong jet stream and you just start to see features like high pressure cells building in certain areas. And the question is, how does the flow go around those high pressure cells? And are they in their normal, typical positions or are they out of position? And that's what we can use the ocean temperature to look at. But you can't make a call. I'm going to write it on the screen here. You cannot make a call on this until June. So we just have to sit, you know this, Dawson. I'm just making sure everybody else remembers. We got to wait to see how that all plays out. Good question, though.
Yeah, definitely think that's a good reminder to think about before we get into that period. And then we're
Uh-huh.
going to be talking about it on a day-to-day period, again, getting into there. But now, looking down to South America, a little
Sure.
bit of a headlines coming in with some better precipitation going through southern Brazil into parts of Argentina that have been asking for it. What are you seeing down there as the latest? As you know, they're still trying to finish up a crop in areas, and also the ongoing safrinha corn planting season in Brazil.
Yeah, well, you and I were talking about it the last two times we've chatted. We saw better rains coming into Buenos Aires and Cordoba and the western areas of Argentina's growing, but we've missed this area. Okay, that's important. It's been very dry in Rio Grande do Sul as well. This is your last 7 days of precipitation. If you look back over the last couple of days, though, I mean, watch the animation again here. We're seeing storms try to get into this area. And that's been the forecast. It seems like we're going to hit that region with better and better rainfall. So when you look at it over the next 2 weeks, these dry spots we've been concerned about are now wetter than average. And that's been consistent. So I can't ignore the fact that we're going to stop the bleeding, if you will, from the drought situation that was going on in Argentina. The other news, and I'd like to hear updates on the national numbers for Brazil. Mato Grosso is at almost 40% harvested on soybeans, average would be about 28, 29%, so they're ahead. Safrinha corn seems to be going in late. And am I right in saying that the total first, so what do they do? About 25% of the corn crop is a first corn crop and 75% is safrinha, right? So if I understand it right, the first corn crop is delayed in harvesting as well. Is that right?
Summer corn harvest has been going at 15%, which is a decent week over week comparison. I guess I don't have a year over year comparison,
Okay.
but from the planting side of things on the second corn crop, yeah, you're still looking at just above a year ago. So I think we're on the whole national scale for the safrinha corn planting, we're kind of teetering back and forth between are we ahead or are we behind compared to a year ago.
Yeah, and that just doesn't make a story that the markets are going to care
Mhm.
about. I just don't think it will until you get some solid evidence of any sort of an issue. You know, again, we can look out there as far as we want. Let me just show you one other thing. I'm going to go to South America now. We're going to look at the 30-day anomalies through mid-March. And I got to be honest, yeah, it looks super wet because we know it's wet over the next 2 weeks in, Argentina, Uruguay. But what about this is a scary thing, right? I don't see anything that's going to slow them down or cause major yield loss. And we're now entering week 8 of record high NDVI in Brazil. So, man, there is not a problem to be found on a big enough scale to be newsworthy across South America, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to see that in January, the USDA had raised their Brazilian soybean estimate,
Uh-huh.
and others have done so the same. You see a lot of these other private firms coming in with higher estimates, but then CONAB, which is, Brazil's USDA equivalent, has actually been kind of lowering to keeping theirs steady. So they're below USDA now, which is kind of interesting, compared to, usually it might be the other side of things, but
Yeah.
yeah, we're seeing a little bit of a dichotomy there between what USDA says and what Brazil is saying itself.
Well, I mean, all I can tell you, if I can pull this up fast, if I go to NDVI here, is I'm going to have a hard time. I'm going to have a hard time understanding. So I just masked this for crop area. And if we click on it, I mean, look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That new red line is outside of the average that they've set since the year 2000. And I cannot see how there is a reason to lower the total number when things look so healthy across a broad area, right? I mean, if I showed you this for the United States, like, look, we have new record high NDVI, you're like, okay, everything has got moisture, it's green, it's going along. What would be the indication that there'd be an issue here? And so I don't know. Maybe I don't know how CONAB works, but
Well, yeah, and it could be an acreage side of things too.
sure.
So I mean, acreage definitely comes into a big play with how they come out with their estimates. I'd have to go into the yield side of things,
Yeah.
to see if that's kind of if it what's the driver there. I mean, it could definitely be the acreage side of things to where they could still be seeing some pretty good yields coming
Yeah.
into this harvest.
Definitely agree. So unless they're, I just don't see a yield issue. There could be a production issue on acreage,
Right.
but I mean, if we even went on the conservative side of assuming their added acreage compared to the last 10 years, we went to the conservative side of that, it's still 2.5% more acreage.
Yep.
So I think the more aggressive is like 4%, but I don't know what those actual numbers are. I'm just looking at historical trends when I say that.
Yeah, definitely something to keep watching down there for the short term.
Yeah.
Gonna be keeping an eye on, seeing how things could progress through February for the U.S. and as we get into that planting season. And again, yeah, it's going to be looking out towards when we can actually be seeing the more day-to-day models, for how things actually shape up for the growing season. But for this week, always appreciate your insights, Eric, and we'll talk next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Dawson. See ya.